Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the second evening of the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Healthcare Career Exploration Series. My name is Katie Dowsett, and I'm delighted to be here with you all. I am a member of the Newton-Wellesley Hospital Board of Trustees, and I also work as the Executive Director of a nonprofit organization called Waltham Partnership for Youth, also known as WPY. WPY's mission is to leverage and coordinate the resources of the Waltham community so that all Waltham youth, especially those from historically marginalized communities, have opportunities to discover their skills and passions and forge their own personal pathway to success, whatever that means for them. I'm here tonight in my capacity as a member of the Newton-Wellesley Hospital's Workforce Development Council. I volunteered to be a part of this group of people because of their commitment to improving career opportunities, especially with young people in the area. The goal of the council is to expand potential career options in the community in hopes of enhancing family financial security and helping to have a strong pool of talented people, such as yourselves, to work at local businesses. All of this ultimately translates to improved health and wellness for our community as a whole. Some of the council's key work includes the high school summer internship program, which is run in partnership with Waltham Partnership for Youth, in which Newton-Wellesley Hospital sponsors up to 20 students in paid positions at the hospital each summer. And additionally, educating students and adults in the community about healthcare careers across all levels, which is the focus of this series. I want to thank you all so much for joining us this evening. I know you'll learn a lot from our incredible panel. And with that, I would like to introduce Beth Downey, the Chief Information Officer for Newton-Wellesley Hospital and Chair of the Workforce Development Council.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm not sure if my share is working, so I'm going to reshare my screen. Hopefully that is showing to everyone. Good evening, everyone. We are so excited you have joined us for the second of our 4 panel discussions, where you'll hear from healthcare professionals about their careers in various healthcare roles. We will discuss their career journeys, the education requirements for their roles, and some of their day-to-day experiences. We will provide an opportunity for you to ask questions of our panelists and understand their roles and career journey to determine if it might be something of interest to you. So as Katie said, my name is Beth Downey, and I'm the Chief Information Officer at Newton-Wellesley Hospital, and I'm also the Chair of our Workforce Development Council, which is the host of tonight's event. I will be the moderator for the event as well. Our first event was held in October, and we have 2 additional events that will be in December and January, so we hope you'll be able to join us for those as well. We would like to welcome everyone and invite questions from all who are attending tonight's event. We have many different attendees at Career Night this year, including students, teachers, parents, and current hospital employees, which we're really excited about. We want these sessions to be as interactive as possible, understanding that it is a Zoom webinar. So we do want you to ask any questions of the panelists by using the Q&A feature. So if you submit any questions in, and you can do those as soon as you have the questions, you don't need to wait until I invite you to put them in there, and then I will pose those questions to the speakers. So we are also recording this session. You will receive a link to the video in an email afterwards, and we will have this for future viewing by anyone who may not have been able to attend. So we're very excited that tonight's panel discussion includes a child life specialist, community health worker, mental health counselor, and an occupational therapist. The panelists will introduce themselves, and I'll ask them a series of questions. Then we'll open it up to the attendees for the Q&A session. So I encourage you, like I said, to start submitting any questions that you have right at the beginning. Don't wait until we finish our initial discussion. So I would like to invite the panelists to turn their cameras on and join me. Excellent, thank you. So we have joining us on the panel, we have Melissa Taormina, who's a child life specialist. Steve Detroit, I knew I was going to mess that up. Sorry, Steve, is a community health worker with Population Health. Jana Trahan is a mental health counselor, and Shayna Kokinen, I'm not doing well with names this evening, I'm really sorry, is an occupational therapist. So we are very excited to have you all here. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And let's see, let's get started. So I'm going to ask each one of you, and I'll go through on the screen and ask you each to introduce yourselves, share some information, what your role at the hospital is, where you're from, where you went to school, and maybe how long you've been at the hospital. So Jana, why don't we start with you?
Hi, everyone. My name's Jana. I'm a mental health counselor at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. I work with both, I work on the inpatient adult psych unit, and I also work with our pediatric psych patients who are waiting for a bed at an inpatient facility. My role on the inpatient adult psych unit is more clinical. I come in, I take vitals, I work with the nurses to care for patients. And then my role on the adolescent side is I provide kind of like almost a crisis counseling module where I'm just a therapeutic resource for the adolescents who are waiting to begin their psychiatric treatment at an inpatient facility. So I work with eating disorder patients who are waiting to be medically stabilized, or kids who are recovering after possibly like a suicide attempt or some ideation. Also, sorry, I guess trigger warning, that is my role specifically. I don't know if anyone else is going to be talking about that, but I know that's a difficult topic for some kids. And yeah, did I miss anything, Beth?
No, I think that's good. We'll get into everything else. Melissa, why don't you go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Taramina. I'm one of the child life specialists at Newton-Wellesley, and I've been at our hospital for almost 4 years. I studied at UNH, University of New Hampshire, where I got my undergrad degree in family studies. I then continued on to Wheelock College, where I got my master's in child life and family-centered care. I grew up in Gloucester, but I live in Marlborough now, a little bit closer to the hospital. And yeah, I'm excited to tell you guys about child life, because most people don't usually know what that is when I say I'm a child life specialist.
Thank you. Shayna.
Okay, hi everybody. So my name is Shayna Cook, and I'm a occupational therapist at Newton-Wellesley Hospital. I specifically work on adult inpatient psychiatry, and I also consult with some of our pediatric kiddos, which is really cool. So I went to UMass Boston undergrad, and I went to Tufts for grad school. So I got my master's in occupational therapy, my undergrad's in psychology. I do a lot of direct clinical work in my role. I run groups, I work with people one-on-one. Again, I work in psychiatry. So we work a lot on coping skills and managing symptoms of psychiatric illness and wellness routines and things like that. But OTs work on function sort of across settings. So it really depends a lot on what population you want to work with, what you get to do. I have been at Newton-Wellesley Hospital for coming on 10 years. Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's great. Thank you. And Steve.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Dotouche, and I am a community health worker in the ICMP department. And ICMP stands for the Integrated Care Management Program. It is for the more medically complex patients. And in my role as a community health worker, I help facilitate and advocate for patients and help them gain access to the basic needs, such as transportation, nutrition, finances, help with housing, and amongst other things. I went to UMass Lowell for my undergrad. I studied public health, and I'm originally from Haiti, and I live in Hyde Park for the moment.
Excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Okay, why don't we go around, and we'll start with, why don't you sort of share why you chose this particular field of study? Jana, do you want to start?
Sure. I forgot to add, I currently go to UMass Boston now as a nursing student. I'm in my undergrad. So Shayna, go Beacons. If anyone out there is interested in the application in nursing school or how all that works, I'd be more than happy to answer questions about that, because it's very confusing and really even made worse the whole process since the pandemic began. I chose this field of study because I actually entered UMass Boston as an international relations student. And when I was switching to nursing, the pandemic hit around that time. And I was like, well, I want to get out there and help and do what I can. And so I ended up working in a psych facility in Brookline first. I gained a lot of experience there. It was kind of a sink or swim moment where it was like, you really have to learn on your feet and learn what you're doing. But yeah, I think the important thing to emphasize here is that for my job anyway, I'm not a licensed mental health counselor. I'm an unlicensed mental health counselor. I'm not a therapist, which means that a lot of my coworkers have degrees in psychology or they're in school to become therapists, but you don't necessarily need to follow a very traditional path to higher education if you're interested in working in psych. You just kind of got to get some experience and get out there and put yourself out there, and you may get lucky and get a job and get your experience, and you can enter the field pretty easily. But yeah, I chose psych kind of by accident and I love it. And now I'm like, the more I get deeper into nursing and the medical stuff and the kind of more gross like infection stuff, I'm like, yeah, I'm good with psych. I'll stay here. So I'm looking at like psych nursing is what I'm going to do when I get there, and being a psych NP. But there's a lot of pathways to getting into this field. I also work closely with Melissa on PD and with Shayna on the adult psych unit. So yeah, there's a lot you can do.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, I think we hear that a lot from folks, is their journey to where their ultimate goal is may not be the line that they originally thought, and their current role that they have oftentimes does help inform what they want to do later. So that's excellent. Melissa, how did you choose your particular field of study?
So when I started my freshman year at UNH, I was actually on the path to becoming a speech language pathologist. And I took my first year of speech language classes, and I enjoyed them, and I loved the idea of being a speech language pathologist. I thought I wanted to work in a school, knew I wanted to work with kids, but I also was taking family studies classes at the time, which I was just really finding a lot of enjoyment in my family studies classes. So I took a lot of courses on the human lifespan, like family dynamics and that sort of stuff. And so I was kind of pulled in that direction. Not that I wasn't enjoying my speech classes, but I kind of had to take a minute and decide like where I was most happy. I felt like I should continue on that path. So family studies was a pretty broad major at UNH. There's 3 different kind of tracks that you could take. I was kind of in the most random track where I was taking classes in recreational therapy. I took a couple OT classes. I was taking a lot of psych courses, was just kind of like doing gen eds and putting my toe in different pools, trying to see like where I felt like I should ultimately be. And then one day I was just like browsing around the UNH website and I discovered that we had a child life minor. So I was like, what is child life? This is intriguing. So it brought me to a YouTube video, which just kind of painted this very majestic picture of what a child life specialist does, like bubbles and Play-Doh and kids in the hospital who are really cute. And, and it kind of made me realize that it was kind of a perfect combination of things that I always knew that I wanted to do, but I didn't really know that that existed. And I am kind of a weirdo. I feel like everyone who works in the hospital has always like enjoyed the hospital environment. Like my aunt used to work in hospitals and like visiting my relatives. I found it comforting for whatever reason. So I really set sail on the child life minor. And as I was embarking on that path, I came to learn that a lot of the child life specialists that I was volunteering with, or like that took the time to share with me their experiences, most of them had their master's degree from Wheelock College. That was very consistent across the board. So when I was a senior at UNH, I applied to Wheelock. I was lucky enough to get in, but I was double lucky enough that I had already secured my child life internship for the summer after I graduated. So I kind of got to have like the fast track master's experience from Wheelock because they didn't need to provide the child life internship for me. So at the time when I was doing my internship coursework, we were required to do 500 hours of internship time under a child life specialist. That also included 100 hours of volunteer work with a child life specialist. So I was at MGH for a while. I did my internship rotations at Tufts, and so I went to Wheelock, did the Wheelock thing, got my master's, and sat for certification. Yeah, so it was kind of direct, but also a windy road.
Excellent. All right, Shayna, how about you?
Yeah, so I think I had a pretty non-traditional route. I took quite a chunk of time off when I finished high school before I actually decided to go back to college. And I sort of had a first career in horticulture and landscape, and I love plants. And I'm super passionate about them, which is, I know, a little bit odd, but it's a thing. So, and I've always also like really loved working with kids. And at one point I just happened to volunteer with a dance therapist at some point in my life, and she was incredibly amazing. And my experience was just like, I want to do this. And she was like, yeah, it's a great career, but it's really hard to find work as a dance therapist. So she was like, hey, OT is sort of this bigger, broader goal, like career that you can kind of go towards, and then you can maybe do things that are pretty similar to what I get to do. And I was like, it sounds like a good plan. So I did go, I went to undergrad, UMass Boston, and then I went right from that to grad school at Tufts. And you, as an occupational therapist, you have to do two 3-month-long like internship placements. So my internship field work, it's called, I did one at Newton-Wellesley. So I actually was there as a student and stayed there. And I did one at a pediatric clinic out near where I am in Northborough. And I ended up working there too. So I worked there for like 5 years in combination with Newton-Wellesley. And now I've kind of transitioned primarily to Newton-Wellesley. So I took some time off before I kind of figured out where I really wanted to go. And I always love like things that people are passionate about, because I like to geek out of my passion. So as an OT, that's one of our big things is like, what do you want to do and why do you want to do it? And who are you and what are the factors that are helping you get to where you want to go, and are there factors that are impacting your ability to get to where you want to go? And so then that OT is like, that's kind of our jam. So I've always wanted to work with kids. So I did, and I just fell in love. I always loved psych, and I fell in love with the OT and psych role, which at Newton-Wellesley Hospital, we have an incredible department, and I'm so grateful to be at our department because OT and psych isn't always the biggest department in places. So sometimes we get pushed out, which is super unfortunate. But we actually started an OT in mental health, but that's a whole different soapbox for a different day. But I love being an OT clearly. So yeah, I think
That's great.
That's my story.
Awesome. Thank you. Steve, would you like to tell us how you chose your field of study?
Yeah, sure. My journey to where I'm at has been very complicated. So after I graduated high school, I applied to UMass Lowell and I got accepted for biology. But I've always been passionate about exercising. I think I wanted to become a doctor because growing up in a Haitian household, that's kind of what my parents expected of me. But it just didn't really feel like my thing. So went to UMass Lowell and I found out on my first day during orientation that they had this program called exercise physiology. And I would basically be doing what I thought I loved, which is exercising and kind of helping people live better lifestyles through just, changing habits and injury prevention, right? And I did that for a year, but after my first year, I took an elective. It was Intro to Public Health. And I just fell in love with public health and the idea of what it is and what it can accomplish. Just kind of seeing how public health and their measures are kind of interactive in our everyday lives. It felt like an art more than a science. And I switched to public health after that elective class, and I just fell in love with it from there. I remember taking the social determinants of health, and that was my favorite class in college. So after I graduated, I actually decided to join the Peace Corps. So I applied for the Peace Corps and I got accepted, surprisingly, because I know typically people have to apply twice before they get accepted. And I was supposed to leave for Ethiopia in January of last year. I was so excited. I was ready. I was going to learn a new language. I was going to be in a different environment and just facing different types of challenges, right? And then I found out that I wouldn't be able to go because I took out some loans that were not in my name. And if I were to go, the loans that are in my name would be postponed, but the ones that are not in my names, I would still have to pay them. And the Peace Corps is a volunteer program. They don't pay for anything. So I decided that I was going to push it off and see if I could find a different alternative. And then COVID started, right? So I didn't really know what was next. And then finally, after a couple of months trying to figure things out, I decided to start looking for a job. And I stumbled upon the community health worker position. And I decided to apply for it. What really attracted me to the position was as soon as I saw the social determinants of health and the job description, I decided that it was the perfect position for me. So I went for it, and here I am now. Yesterday marked my 1 year.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's always so important when you're in school to take classes that are a little different that you might not think you like, because sometimes that's when you can find that your real path of what is going to fill your and make you passionate about it.
Yeah,
Excellent. Okay, why don't we get into some of the like real nuts and bolts of what it takes from a schooling perspective and tests or exams or certifications to actually get into the role that you're in. So Jonna, why don't we start with you? And you might even be able to speak, because I know you said you're an unlicensed mental health counselor. I don't know if you know any information of what it also takes to become a licensed mental health counselor. If you don't, that's totally fine.
I mean, I know a little bit.
Yeah.
So several of my coworkers, both on the adult unit and on PD, are in school to become licensed mental health counselors, or LMHCs. Those are your like traditional therapists. So typically you need a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then you need a master's degree in either an LMHC program or a social work program. I'm a little, correct me if anyone knows I'm wrong on this, but social workers are also trained in a lot of therapeutic aspects, and they can be LMHCs, and it's licensed clinical social worker, and they can also provide therapeutic services. And after that, you need, I think it's like a certain number of hours at an internship or shadowing, and then you have to take some clinical boards. So that is a lot. Yes, that's closer to, I think, the path that Melissa and Shayna take. For myself, for an unlicensed mental health counselor, they really do encourage degrees in psychology, or to be in a grad program, or to be pursuing something in medicine in my case. If you're interested in becoming a nurse or a psych nurse, then you would enter, there's a ton of different paths for this, but you could get an associate's degree in nursing, you can get a bachelor's degree in nursing, you could already have a bachelor's degree and get a master's in accelerated nursing. So there's a ton of ways to do that. And then from there on, you can become a psych NP, you can become a family NP, you can do whatever you like. If you become interested in heart stuff and neuro stuff, the world is your oyster.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So do you think, because you're working in a hospital already in this role, will it, or do you hope it will make it easier to get a nursing job when you graduate from nursing school?
Yeah,
I don't know
so
how that works.
actually, I'm just going to put this out there. Newton-Wellesley has a reputation. All partners hospitals have really good reputations in nursing schools and stuff. But like when I tell people I work at Newton-Wellesley, especially like my nursing instructors are like, "Oh, really? How'd you get that job?" And I'm like, "I don't know. You're gonna have to." I just kind of kept interviewing, and they liked me, and so here I am. But the really great thing about working at a partners hospital or at this hospital is I will have a much easier time once I pass the NCLEX, my licensing, a nursing licensing exam, getting a job. I would love to work with the team I already work with at Newton-Wellesley as a psych nurse. So yeah, we have a fantastic, with Shayna and Melissa and both the PD psych and the adult psych team. Everyone I work with is lovely and fantastic. And if you're considering a career in psych, then you should definitely come to Newton-Wellesley.
That's great. Excellent. All right, Melissa, why don't you share the specific requirements that it takes to get to where you are?
Yes. So I kind of started to talk about that a little bit when I was introducing myself. But right now, the Association of Child Life Professionals is our like big hub of child life professional like group, I guess. So the ACLP, which is actually kind of tricky right now, and there's lots of talk about changing this requirement because a lot of hospitals still have pretty strict kind of rules with volunteers coming into the hospital with COVID restrictions. But in a non-COVID world, and hopefully sometime very soon, because we really miss our volunteers, you would need 100 hours of volunteer time with it directly underneath a child life specialist. But like if you were to ask myself or my coworkers, we say any experience with well or sick children is always going to be beneficial for your resume and just like in general to kind of decide if that is the career for you. So after you volunteer, you need 600 hours of internship under CCLS. when I was in undergrad for my bachelor's, at the time, they were going to require a master's degree for all child life specialists, which is why I so like fiercely wanted to go to Wheelock. They actually changed that a couple of years ago, and they no longer require a master's degree. However, if you search like the job boards for a child life specialist, most of the Boston hospitals prefer a master's degree. There's like no difference of, I don't think they can really like judge you based upon having a master's versus a bachelor's, but it's always says preferred. And then so going into like coursework type of stuff, a lot of the courses that I took, like I said, were around family studies, but I also took lots of courses in bereavement and death and dying, classes about adult development as well, lots of different psych coursework. I was actually talking to a student recently who is interested in pursuing child life, and she asked me if it was hard. And that's like always kind of a loaded question. I feel like any field or any career within the medical field has its challenges, obviously, and you have to be committed to doing the coursework and spending that time in the library, writing your papers and reflecting upon your experiences. But with child life specifically, it's super competitive because there aren't like, in our hospital, we have 5 full-time child life specialists. I'm not sure how many full-time nurses we have, but it's
A lot more than 5.
It's a lot more than 5. Yes. So there definitely is a competitive nature to it, which can be challenging. And we have an intern right now who says you need to be able to not let that get you down. And you have to be really persistent.
Excellent. Okay, Shayna, what's the schooling required?
Yeah, so I have my undergrad in psychology, and you can go into OT school with an undergrad really in anything as long as you will kind of meet the prereqs. With my undergrad in psychology, I met most of them, although I've always been like into like neuro and biology and stuff. So some of those courses I took just wanting to take them, and they were prereqs for OT school. So like kinesiology, anatomy and physiology, those kinds of courses are some of the prereqs for OT school that a lot of my peers maybe didn't have, who are coming to OT school, grad school, you know, with maybe like a public health background or somebody, you know, communication backgrounds. You can actually go to OT school with really an undergrad in anything, again, as long as you kind of meet the prereqs. And then OT school itself, so it's grad school, right, for 2 years. It's actually changed, and now it is OTD. So I am not a doctorate, but like my peers who are in OT school now will be doctorates. That's similar to like the physical therapy route, which used to just be like not just, but used to be a master's and now is a doctorate level. So for OT school, that typically means like one sort of grad project or a thesis project or something like that. But when so that's in addition to 6 months of field work. So 2 separate 3-month placements. Most of the schools will help you find placements, but they are very challenging to find, and COVID definitely impacted that. You know, when I went to school, I was able to really choose where I wanted to go, but that's not the case, I think, so much depending on region and different in what school you went to, and maybe what population you want to get into. So in coursework really spans all the way, you know, all human development. So from little people to big people, right? Really, we have a lot of, there's a lot of medical coursework that you have to know, because we're really looking at like function in a lot of different ways. So it's like the function of your elbow, and also like the function of your memory, and like the function of your gut, right? So we have like, we're sort of have to know all of those things. So the coursework's pretty, I don't know, I guess there's a variety there. So not sure if I covered kind of.
No,
okay.
that's great.
And then you have to sit for your boards. So you have this big, huge test that you have to sit for, which is not as scary as it sounds, but kind of scary. And your license. So you have to maintain your licensure. You have to, I forget how many continuing ed credits I have to have, but I have to have continuing ed that that the board of OT, you know, could potentially ask you for proof for, kind of. So there's some requirements there to maintain your licensure.
Excellent. Thank you. So Steve, before I jump to you, I do want to encourage any of our attendees, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to submit them in. Now we don't have any questions yet. I still have a few more that I can ask, but I want to encourage our attendees to submit in any and all questions that they have. So Steve, can you go through some of the specifics of what might be required to do the job that you're doing today?
Yeah, sure. So I am not a licensed community health worker, but there is a licensure for it, and not every organization requires one. And I don't think that specifically you need to have that public health background to be a community health worker. It does help though, because my classes that I took in undergrad were a combination of the health sciences and social sciences and just kind of all over the place. But the main concentrations were health science classes. It does help because in my everyday interactions, I work a lot with the nurses and the physicians. So it kind of helps to understand the lingo, even though I still don't understand 50% of what they're talking about most of the time. But just having that background kind of gives you an advantage. And I think for the licensure, the state has two different pathways. There's one where you need to do 4,000 hours of work, and then you can apply for it. And then the other one is you need to do some training in combination with 2,000 hours of work, and then you can apply for it. And for public health in general, there's different licensures that you can get. I think there's a certified health education specialist that you can get. That's a licensure that allows you to kind of work with people around just health planning and wellness management and things like that. So there's different types of licensures that you can get with public health. And then for community health work, there's this specific license that you can get.
Excellent, thank you. So I am curious though, are you still planning in the future that you want to go to the Peace Corps?
Honestly, I don't think it's going to happen. I'm getting up there. I'm getting old. I don't
Yeah, come see me in a while and I'll tell you about old.
No, I would love to one day. I think it's still a passion of mine to live somewhere different and get to make a difference. So we'll see.
Excellent. That's awesome. Okay, so now I think, why don't we talk about sort of what a typical day looks like for each of you? So let's see if we can share with our attendees what it's like every day to do your job. So Jana, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I'll start with when I work on an adult unit. Typically I work 3 to 11. I come onto the unit, we get reports, see what's going on with the patients, see who we're working with, if there have been any issues throughout the day, any admissions, any COVID positives, we get all of that, get assignments. One of the primary responsibilities of the mental health counselors is to do checks on patients, which means every 15 minutes you have to account to make sure that every patient is safe, and that they're where they're supposed to be. And so that's one of our main jobs. So we split those up, me and my coworkers. Get vital signs first thing of the shift. This is like a very clinical part where you're kind of half nursing assistant, half mental health counselor, which is why it works for me and which is why it works for my coworkers. Throughout the day, we run groups as mental health counselors, like small groups, community meetings, all that stuff. And then any issues that arise, we're the first go-to if the patient is upset, if the patient is tearful, if there's an altercation between two patients, if there's issues here and there, we're the first kind of line of defense to put a stop to it, to not escalate it. When a lot of times when patients are agitated or tearful, it's our job to intervene. If we see conflict building, your first role is like, let's de-escalate this, let's not let it get anything bigger. And then very rarely, very, very rarely do we ever have to restrain a patient or break up a fight or anything like that. And that's when things can get a little dicey. And then when I come in on pediatrics, I come in every Monday, meaning I see any kids who were admitted over the weekend, any kids who are waiting in the ER to be seen. And there I provide a more of a therapeutic role. So I'll come in the morning, I'll go up, I'll check the charts, I'll see where the patients are at, who saw them on Friday, how they did. New patients, I just, read what brought them into the hospital. If they're in the ER, what are they in the ER for? I go up to pediatrics, I talk with the nurses there. I'm like, hey, you have this patient, how are they doing? What would you recommend? How should I approach them? Are they friendly? Are they a little guarded? Should I just what's your opinion? Because the nurses always kind of know best. If I run into Melissa, I'll ask her, hey, have you met with this patient? What do you think? What do you recommend that they need? Do they need help with coping skills? Are they having a really hard time being in the hospital? All of that stuff. And then I create little mini therapy sessions for them. If they're in the ER, a lot of times I'll do something called a safety plan or a safety tool. If a child has come in after an unsafe situation waiting to be evaluated by a psychiatrist, I'm like, let's come up with a plan for what we will do step by step if you are ever feeling unsafe again, so that if they go home, if they're not hospitalized, I send them home with this piece of paper. I'm like, take this home with you, put it in your backpack, put it on the fridge, just have it. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and anxious, you know that there's a plan. Sometimes I'll do little DBT activities, and then sometimes I just get to kind of hang out with them. If they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. I'm just there if they decide they do want to talk down the line. I had a really great day on Friday. I had a girl with an eating disorder, and she was really struggling with kind of thoughts that she didn't deserve to eat. She'd tell me, oh, there's a man in my head, like there's a voice in my head telling me I don't deserve this food. And I'm like, okay, and I flipped over the piece of the activity I brought her. I'm like, let's put a face to this man, right? Like, who's telling you this? Or let's put a face to this voice. And she drew this little monster, and he had horns and a tail and evil eyes. And I'm like, would you listen to what this man tells you? Like, this is your villain, right? This is the villain in your story telling you all these things, making you sick. I'm like, you're fighting him. Are you going to take crap from him? She's like, no. I'm like, okay, what are you going to tell him? And I'm like, it was very silly, and I felt very silly, but I felt very good about it because it hurt her. So I hold up the piece of paper, and I'm like, you don't deserve to eat. And I'm like, what are you going to tell him? And she's like, I'm going to tell him to F off. I'm like, yeah, you are. Let's go. And I'm like, she's 13 and get to swear at 13. I'm like, I don't care. I'm like, yes. I'm like, what are you going to tell him? And she's like, I deserve to eat. I deserve this food. I'm like, yeah. I'm like, let's go. I'm like, we fight this man. We don't take crap from the monster. So that was a really good day that I had on
Oh, that's awesome.
Monday. So yeah, it's a really rewarding job, and I'm really lucky with how young I am and the place in my life I am that I get to come in and do this job.
That's so great. It must give you a really good feeling when you get home at the end of the day that you were able to really help someone like that.
Yeah, and because I'm not gonna lie, this can be very stressful working on an inpatient unit or working with kids who are so sick and so young. But when you have a good day, you have a really good day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's great highs and some unfortunate lows.
So I have a few follow-up questions for you. So you said a typical, when you started in the adult unit, it might be 3 to 11 that you'd be working. Do you ever work like the overnight shift, the early shift? So usually it's like 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7 a.m. would be the overnight shift. So do you do that?
I do. They're pretty similar. We're basically just running the unit. We get patients during the day. It's very busy. Doctors are coming in, people are coming in for rounds. You've got PA students, you've got nurse practitioners, you've got all these people coming in and out and coordinating that. Hats off to people who work the day shift, and hats off to people who work the night shift. I also work nights. Sometimes I'll work, and I don't recommend doing this if you're in school, but over the summer I work 3 p.m. to 7 a.m. the next morning, which has a financial benefit, which if you're a student, you love. But the night shift is quiet, but when things happen on the night shift, things happen on the night shift. If you have a patient who's upset and yelling during the night shift, during the evening shift, we're like, okay, let's go get him calmed down, put him in their room. During the night shift, if that happens, everyone's awake, everyone's up, and now everyone's upset because they got woken up. So there's less staff and there can be more to manage, or there's more staff and there's a lot more to manage. You've got just so much going on all at once.
All right. But you could work So any of those shifts, mental health
Yeah.
counselors would work, and it would be 7 days a week. So holidays, weekends,
Oh, yeah.
everything.
Christmas Day, I'll be there. Who's going to be
Yeah.
there?
So
Yep.
that's some of what we want to make sure we share with our attendees. And then sort of on a side note, before I move to Melissa will be next. As you can see, I'm going around my screen here in the same order. You had said originally, I think you were planning to be a nurse, and then when COVID hit, is that when you switched to mental health counselor?
No, so I was originally an international relations major, and I
Right,
worked
right.
at the John F. Kennedy Library. And when COVID hit, all of that got shut down. And the week before COVID hit, literally like March 3rd, I had a meeting with my advisor being like, I don't want to do international relations anymore. I think I kind of want to do nursing. And how do I do that? And so kind of this plan started turning, and then COVID hit, and I was like, okay, so I can't volunteer. I can't go, I can't get a CNA license. I
So it was
can't.
like 2 weeks before COVID really hit that you
Yeah,
decided that. I gotcha.
basically, that
Okay.
I decided that. I think, what was I going to say? Oh, I think Melissa said something about being comfortable in hospitals. I'm terrified of needles. Like, I am terrified of needles. I have to get my blood drawn every 6 months now in nursing school, and I sent an email to my person who's like in charge of all this, and I'm like, please don't. I'm like, please give me more time. Like, it's really bad. So, and if anyone out there is uncomfortable with like medical stuff, with procedures, I won't go to the dentist because I don't want to get my wisdom teeth out. Like, I don't want them to tell me I have to get my wisdom teeth out. There's definitely a way around it. If you're interested in medicine, but that's where you kind of stumble. There's a lot of things that you can do without having to necessarily like face your fear in that way. I was like, I call it karma. My mom calls it karma because when I was younger, she would take me to get my shots and I would like kick the nurses. And now I'm in nursing school. So I'm like, oh, it's my karma. I was like very young, 4 or 5, but yeah, so there's definitely things that you can do in medicine, even if you are
And you will get
less
kicked by
familiar.
little kids.
Yes, or
Yes.
big kids.
Big kids, yeah. I suppose the little kids might hurt a little less. So excellent, thank you. Melissa, what is a typical day like for you and other child life specialists?
So I try to make sure that the kids aren't kicking the nurses.
I couldn't used to when
it's a
I was
team
younger. The
effort.
nurses would have loved having me.
Yes. So child life kind of looks different depending on whichever unit you're in. So like, for example, I do primarily work with our PD mental health patients right now because we've had such an influx in need since COVID. But before COVID, I was our float child life specialist. So I went all over the hospital. If I was working in the emergency room, we provide lots of procedural support for things like stitches and IV inserts and, anything that you come in to the ED for. So kind of take a couple of steps back. If you were a 5-year-old and you came in with a headlock, I'm not going to tell you that you are getting sutures. I'm going to tell you that you're here today for string Band-Aids. So a big part of child life is to break down anything medical and breaking it down so that way a child can understand what's happening to them in a developmentally appropriate way. A big part of that is in a hospital situation, obviously, whether you're here for sutures or whether you have like a serious medical condition, kids lose control. And that's like the big thing that everyone needs, no matter what phase of development that you're in, you need control. So we'll go in and we'll show the different materials to the kids. I'll show them the string. I'll say, like, it might look like something that you maybe have at home in your bathroom. Like, it kind of looks like floss to me. We call it string Band-Aids, but I think it looks like floss. Or things like the cleaning, like the betadine. I think it looks like chocolate syrup. So breaking it down in a way, or like a lot of parents will give me coffee. So breaking it down in ways that kids can understand and like they can feel like they're part of their care plan. On the other side of that is also working with the parents and making sure that they feel like they're an equal part of the care team. We spend a lot of time coming up with coping plans. So if you do need stitches or you need an IV placed, my job is to help make it so that it goes as smoothly as possible. Now that's obviously not always guaranteed with like a screaming 2-year-old. We kind of have realistic expectations. We might try to distract them with like a Baby Shark video or like a rain stick or a lighty up spinny toy. But ultimately, I mean, it hurts to to get your head stitched. But we try to make it as seamless as possible. So we do lots of work in that. If I was in pre-op, I would talk to kids before they go in for their surgery about the anesthesia mask and preparing them for what the surgical room is going to be like. We break it down into saying, like, this is your special mask that you're going to breathe the special sleepy air. We do things like have the kids choose like what chapstick flavor they can paint on the inside. So that way the anesthesia gases doesn't like fully cover up that like smelly anesthesia smell, but kind of masks it. And it's another way to give kids control. What flavor is your air going to smell like? We decorate the masks, we prepare the parents, and we accompany them into the room. So that way, if we have a proper care plan in line and we have mom reading a book to the kiddo while they're breathing that sleepy medicine, it really is just like just such a positive experience, both for the patient and the kiddo. And I think it makes any future healthcare encounters hopefully less scary for kids and for the parents. And similarly to a big part of what I do all day is I play. So I bring toys to patient rooms, whether that's Legos and bubbles and like art projects, or like I say to all of our mental health patients that I work with, like, obviously I respect the fact that a 17-year-old is not a small child. Like, I'm happy to bring you Legos and bubbles, but I also respect the fact that you might not need anything that I have to offer, but I'm always down to like play a card game, sit and chat. I can talk to a wall, kind of whatever the patient needs in that time, I'm happy to be. And also just being an advocate with the other multidisciplinary team members. I think we're so lucky at Newton-Wellesley because everyone does such a good job at making sure that people feel comfortable, that, you know, they feel like their questions are being answered and they're not, you know, just sitting around all day waiting for people to come and check in and update them. But a lot of people can be intimidated by the like rounding in the morning when 8 people come into the room. It can be intimidating with a room of white coats. So if I go in after the docs have been rounding, sometimes parents are like, oh, I actually forgot to ask them this question, but I wasn't sure, like, is that a stupid question? Like, do you think maybe that one medical student can come back in? And so I'm always happy to be that kind of middleman advocator. Yeah.
That's great. So it
yeah.
sounds like while your focus most often is with the children, you're probably equally as focused on the parents and
Yes,
helping
definitely.
them as much, and helping the kids is helping the parents. But
definitely. And
sometimes
we always say,
are you just helping the parents more?
I know. Sometimes it feels that way. I think for the really little kids and also for the teenagers, sometimes I feel like I am more helpful to the parents than to the patient. But we always say, like, obviously a parent knows their kid better than any of us. Obviously, we might be like the professionals, but you, the parent, are the professional of your kid. So you know them best. We are just a little sidestep on your journey of life. So just really encouraging patients and parents to feel empowered with that. I had another thought too that I was going to say, but I forgot. That will come back to me.
It'll come back to you.
Well,
I think I also have a thought that when Jonna has to go and get her needles, you might need to go with her.
Yes, I would really like Melissa to come hold my hand. I really need it. Okay.
She'll give it some nice name. It's not a needle anymore. It's like a string Band-Aid thing.
Yep, it's a tiny straw.
Yeah.
I really need the tiny straw. I need the support.
She'll help you get through it. You'll have some therapy sessions with that. So excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Great. Shayna.
So let's see, like my typical day. So again, I work on adult inpatient psychiatry. So we run groups, and we also have our own caseload of patients. So every day I sort of have a different schedule of the groups that I run. I run a lot of substance use groups. I run sensory groups. I run a lot of sort of relaxation groups, those kinds of things. And then have one-on-one sessions with patients really throughout the day, either to work on specific goals that we had talked about at some point, like kind of homework from groups, or, crisis intervention a lot of times, because I am like a sensory, I'm like, I don't know, sensory is another passion of mine. So I'm like kind of sensory go, like I love sensory stuff. So a lot of times I'm offering sort of first line of defense things, right? So somebody's in a really acute crisis and we're trying to offer basically tools that help de-escalate. So, you know, somebody's really stressed and, you know, I will just go in and, you know, offer maybe a fidget or maybe a stress ball, or if really in distress, maybe something really cold. And I will honestly just typically breathe with that person. So my day can be pretty varied depending on what kind of patients I have. Sometimes, you know, my direct sessions are more like, hey, come into the yoga room with me and do boxing. Sometimes my direct sessions are really specific work on developing a sensory diet. Sometimes I'm, you know, running groups where we're playing bingo, right? So we try to make sure we're kind of covering the gamut of what occupations really are, and what we're doing within the hospital is trying to kind of promote the routines there. So but as an OT in general, you could do, your day could look like anything. I mean, you can work in home health where you are in your car and go to different patients' homes all day. You can work in an outpatient clinic with children, which is what I did for so long, where you basically just like put them on swings and get to play. So you can do that. You can work in schools where you kind of get to play, but then also have to deal with teachers. You can work in, you know, inpatient rehab. You know, we have like a whole rehab team, and their day looks very different from mine. So they typically will go throughout the whole hospital, or maybe specific units that are theirs, and do one-on-one sessions with their clients. So OT is a very big, broad field, which is cool because you get to do so much stuff. But similar to what Melissa said, people almost always have no idea what it is that I do. And sometimes my mom is still like, are you sure you know how to do that? And I'm like, pretty sure. But I really encourage folks to look at it if you are interested in healthcare and also really interested in direct patient care. Because that's, as an OT, you're so pretty much gonna be guaranteed to always like be in direct patient care. And that's something to think about too. If you wanted to go into healthcare, there's folks who are, you know, more in direct patient care. And then there's routes or careers that you can go in where you may end up in more, you could end up in more like healthcare management roles. So it's something to think about too, what kind of healthcare you want to be in.
Because I think like in my head, occupational therapist, I guess and maybe I'm totally wrong, think about like someone who like an elderly patient who maybe was injured and has to sort of like relearn how to do things, or learning how to relearn how to cook for themselves, maybe after they've had a stroke or something. Is that in that?
Absolutely. So
Okay.
as an OT, and what we would call that FISDIS, physical dysfunction,
Okay.
would do more of like, it would look very similar to that, would be much more like a rehab professional. And you would either work in an outpatient facility, a hospital potentially, or home health, and would do much more you know, recovery from trauma, either stroke or those, you know, TBI. You can work specifically with neuro patients if you want to. You can work specifically with cardiac patients if you want to. So there's really, it runs the gamut. And then you can work, you know, in older adult geriatric psychiatry, you know, so, or you can work in early intervention, where you, you know, go out to families' homes and are a really integral part in developing like care plans to move kiddos forward in their development. So it's, you really can do a lot of
broad.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge. Yeah.
So it sounds like some of yours is coping skills that you're giving folks. I think it sounds like when they're stressed. So not that they're relearning how to physically do something, they're learning how to manage.
Yeah. So if you think about
and anxiety and things.
Exactly. Right. So if you think about, when you're thinking about mental health, what are some of the things that interfere with your ability to do what you want to do? Maybe you're anxious. You can't get out. You can't leave the house to do what you need to do. Maybe you're anxious because you really want to go hang out with your friends, but your social anxiety is just making it that you can't. Maybe you're, maybe you're so depressed that you really haven't gotten out of bed, you know, I mean, and so what we look at is what's getting in the way of function ultimately. So yeah, we do work on routines, we work on coping skills, we work on stress management, maybe a lot of wellness routines as well that we do, relaxation skills, mindfulness, DBT, CBT, all of the acronyms. Because I kind of love sensory stuff, I definitely do a lot of sensory modulation, which is like thinking about how your environment and changes your environment can change how you feel. So, thinking about, hey, if you need to get yourself up and going to clean your house, would you want to listen to Enya, or do you want to listen to like your workout list, right? So it's kind of like those kinds of skills where we're trying to help folks figure out how they can get back to the things that are really important to them. And mental health can be really, really challenging, especially as an OT, because one of the things that we primarily think about and a way to sort of work on things is, what are you passionate about and what do you like? And sometimes depression, if you don't like anything, you're not passionate about anything. And so in a lot of ways, we really are trying to reconnect people to like what kind of motivates them and what moves them forward. And a lot of, as OT, especially in my role in psychiatry, there's a lot of what we call like therapeutic use of self, which I think everybody would just basically mean like you are a kind human being to people, and you sort of use your personhood and what you know to build like a rapport and a trusting relationship with people. So sometimes that's part of what we're doing too, is helping people learn how to communicate and learn how to make connections. So
excellent. So I will ask you, and then I'm actually going to go back to Melissa because don't think we asked this, is what are the hours that you usually work? And is it similar to Jana, where it's like any shift, 24/7? Yeah. So for you, Shayna.
So in psychiatry, really, we like are mostly just there like when people are up, right? Because we're like doing stuff with people. So like I work like 7 to 3, and most of my peers will work somewhere in there. Some of us like come in a little bit later and try to stay a little bit later. So some people will come in at like 9 and work to 5, something like that. So we're able to, within our department, be a little flexible with our times, as long as like it's an 8-hour shift and it's within the time that people are awake, so we can do things with people. And usually that's kind of the case with OT across the board, right? If you think about a hospital setting or really any kind of
you're not doing it while they're sleeping.
Yeah, right. Which is actually really funny, because at one point, before I really thought this whole OT thing through, I was like, well, when I have kids, this will be great because I can work at night, and my husband can work during the day. It was like, it'd be fabulous. And then obviously that I figured that out really soon, and that wasn't the case. But yeah, so there's some variability, but it's like daytime. Yeah.
Okay. But it's probably 7 days a week. So do they have folks there on the weekends and holidays as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's not a day that we don't have OT. It definitely depends. Like, Christmas, we have 1 or 2 people there. And we'll usually just try to make the day fun. Like we're just there to be like, we're all here on Christmas. Let's do this. So,
but that could be a more difficult day for some patients. I think
it's really hard.
Really hard.
It's really hard. We do like a patient Christmas party, or one of those ones where you like swap things, a Yankee swap. Yeah. So we get like gifts. We'll get gifts for every patient, and then they do like a
really
Yankee swap. So that's nice. We try to make it try to do the best that we can to make the hospital a positive environment. I like the way that Melissa said it, like thinking about trying to ensure that you're doing the best that you can to make sure the healthcare experience was positive, so that people like looking forward be like, hey, that's actually a place I want to go for care, or I want to have care at all. Because healthcare can be really intimidating baseline for a lot of people. So I think the more that every single person along the line that you come in contact with is just supportive, and trying to think about how the hospital is not like most people's jam, except for Melissa, I guess. We try to think about how do we make this like more doable for you.
Right. Excellent. So Melissa, I don't think we really asked your hours and what the typical hours of the child life specialists are.
So I do work 9 to 5, and I am at the hospital, like Shayna said, like when the children are awake and when doctors are like mostly poking and prodding at them. But I will say, like, our emergency room, our PDED is open until 2 a.m. So the child life specialists who work in the ED do stay until 12 a.m. or 1 a.m. It kind of depends on the specialist. We have tons of per diem child life specialists too, who pick up like these random, kind of like Shayna was saying, who have like kids at home who come and work from like 8 p.m. to 1 a.m., which doesn't sound super appealing to me, but it works for their life.
Yeah.
And that also just depends on the setting. Like our surgical child life specialist is very much only there 7 to 3, because, most surgical planned cases happen straight in the morning. Thinking like broader to other hospitals in our area, other children's hospitals, like Shayna was saying, to like holidays. It's a sad day to be in the hospital on Christmas Day if you're
Yeah, little kid.
if you're a little kid. Yep. So we do cover holidays at Newton-Wellesley, just one child life specialist in-house for all of the areas, and kind of rooted out of the emergency room. We see like lots of allergic reactions and head lacks and just like babies with fevers and normal wintry things during the holiday season. But I know a lot of the folks that I went to school with who work at the downtown hospitals, who work with kids who are more acute. The holidays are like the biggest time for them. They have like the most fun because you've got to make it big
Yeah.
for kids who are stuck in the hospital for weeks at a time, right?
Right.
And we also cover weekends. I used to cover every third weekend in the emergency room, but I don't do weekends anymore, but we can pick up. But pretty much a daytime sort of shift.
When they're
depending
awake.
where you are.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, Steve, you're up. What's a typical day like for you?
Wow, I don't even know where to start. But first of all, what I say is that no 2 days are alike. And also, I want to say that I feel like I've been deprived of my experience as a community health worker, like the full experience. I didn't get the chance to work in this position before COVID, and I think it's a lot different when COVID wasn't around. You get to be in the community, interacting with folks, and just being out there. And also, being a community health worker looks different at different places. I know that you can work at hospitals, community health centers, you can work at colleges, different places, the roles look different there. But I feel like some days I wear different hats. Like I'll play the role of a friend, a therapist, a parent, just different hats throughout the day. And a typical day will look like, so I split my time between 5 different practices and I assist about 35 different physicians. And typically, I have a new patient and I will give them a call and I'll do an intake. So I ask them questions about their kind of barriers that prevent them to accessing their care. So the key to my position is information, empowerment, and compassion, right? Because you want to connect patients with the resources that they need, but you also want to empower them to be able to navigate this complex healthcare system that we have, right? But you also want to have compassion because a lot of these patients are dealing with lots of difficulties and things that prevent them from being as healthy as they want to be. I work primarily with the Medicaid population, so people in mass health, the low income patients. And the things that we take for granted is what I really assist people with. Some people can't get to their appointments as regularly as they would like because they don't have transportation, right? And some people don't know where the next meal is going to come from. So I help them apply for SNAP and connect them to food shelters. Food places where they can go and get food. Some people need shelter. Some people need just financial help and they don't know where it's going to come from, right? They have bills to pay that prevent them from making their doctor's appointments, right? Different needs that they have that are keeping them from accessing the care that they need. And just to think about it, the healthcare system is very complex and scary. It's a scary thing to navigate, right? Some people don't know what questions to ask their doctors or their nurse, and there's communication lacking because they feel intimidated. Like, my nurse is telling me this, I'm not quite sure what this means. I need this from my doctor, I don't know how to reach them. So most likely they'll reach out to me and then I'll kind of connect with the physician and then I'll get back to the patient, or I'll with the nurse and then I'll get back to the patient. Or the physician will be concerned that a patient is not doing as well as they should be doing because they don't have access to ABC, right? And then I'll reach out to this patient and then I'll assist them. And what I really assist with is the social determinants of health. So the things that someone needs on a daily basis to be able to be as healthy as they can. Because when we think healthcare, we think the hospital, right? But healthcare really starts outside of the hospital, caring for yourself, right? You have to make sure you're eating right. You have to make sure you're sleeping, that you have a roof over your head, a place where you feel safe, where you can do the daily things that you need to be doing, right? You have to be able to put clothes over your back. You have to be able to pay rent and all those things. So I help people apply for Social Security disability insurance. I help them apply for supplemental security income, SNAP. Some people just don't feel safe at home and they need to get out of there as soon as possible. So I help them find a shelter to go to. What else? Just different things, like I said. And sometimes some patients, they just need someone to talk to. They need to feel like they're being listened to and that you can give them suggestions, right? Like I said, information, right? As they're telling you what they're going through, you're listening, you're being compassionate, you're telling them, right, things are gonna work out, right? But in addition to that, you have to be able to give them hope, right? Give them something to look forward to. So you're telling me you have this problem, right? I'm already thinking about how to solve it, right? I'm already thinking about solutions, things that I'm gonna do for you to make it easier so that you can focus on the other problems, right? The patient has diabetes, they were diagnosed with cancer last week, they're dealing with this, they're going through treatment. Now they can't go to work as regularly as they want to go to work. So they have to worry about, am I gonna be able to pay my bills next month, right? Am I going to be able to drive to this appointment? Right? How will I get to this appointment that I have tomorrow? I don't have a car, right? So all these things, I'm thinking about it and I'm thinking about solutions and I'm thinking about resources that I can connect them to in the community. What else?
So I have a question for you, Steve, on those resources. When you started your job, were you given like a toolkit that says, here's all of these resources that you can use? And I'm hoping that you got something, but are you like building on that as you sort of are just figuring it out as you go?
Yes, I was giving a toolkit, but it wasn't as helpful as it was intended to be because everything has changed with COVID, right? Resources have shifted, but different things are now prioritized. Finding that around the time of COVID, financial resources was really needed, and also resources for housing. So a lot of the job at first was doing research. Like I said, before COVID, I feel like I would be in the community interacting with different folks and kind of making those connections and learning about those resources. But now it's mainly I'm at a computer just kind of like looking into resources, calling organizations, asking them, do you have XYZ? What does a patient need to qualify for it? So a lot of it is research and just kind of thinking outside of the box sometimes. And I find that I have to be creative because certain patients can qualify for this one thing and another patient doesn't. So it's about kind of also knowing the different communities that patients come from and also thinking about the cultural reasons for not feeling so comfortable to accessing certain types of resources, right? Because some patients tend to be more reluctant to ask for help in the first place. Yeah, so it's a lot of just kind of doing your research and thinking how you can help the patients in need.
Yeah. And do you get to, do your other colleagues, community health workers, do you reach out to each other to ask, like, I've got a challenging patient here. Do you have a recommendation of something you've done for someone in the past? Do you work with the team?
We collaborate a lot of the times. A big part of the job also is just we have these things called cluster rounds. So it's people from different disciplines, right? We'll have a community health worker on there, we'll have a nurse, and then we'll have a social worker on there. We'll just have different disciplines and then we'll just brainstorm. So I can bring a patient that I'm struggling to find help for and I'll say what they're going through and then people will give suggestions. And also just sometimes before you can help someone with resources, you have to be able to understand what they're going through, medically. And also you got to understand their psychological barriers that may prevent them from following through with those resources. So we do a lot of brainstorming and collaborating. And I do work with another CSW and she was instrumental in just training me when I first started and just showing me the ropes. I think she did do one of those, Diane Ferris. I don't know if you know her. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, excellent. And what are your normal work hours?
I get to be flexible. I think some of it is because of COVID, so I'm kind of like hybrid. But I like to work the 7 to 3. So kind of hours when people are awake, but I like to start early, just get my day going.
Excellent. And are you Monday through Friday? So you're not working on weekends? Oh, that's good. Okay.
I don't work the
So-
weekends, but like I said, some places people have to work the weekends, they work
Right.
the shifts. So
And not holidays, probably in general. So that would be a different.
not holidays.
Great. Okay. Yeah, I think it's important for folks to know, because it is it's a very different experience. So while all of your roles are different in a lot of ways, it's amazing to me how similar they are, in that at the core of what you guys are doing is really just listening to the patients, what they're saying verbally and physically, and just trying to understand them to figure out a solution. And that I don't think there isn't really like a manual to be able to say, this is what this patient has and this is what I do. You really have to listen to them and figure out the path that is different for each patient, which is, that's what I've been really hearing as you're going through and sharing what your days are like. It's like, while you're very different, there's so many similarities in all of your jobs together, in that listening and just hearing what the patients are saying and figuring out how to solve their problems, which is amazing. Excellent. So we do have a few questions that have come in. So I will take a look at some of those. So this one I'll throw it to anyone who wants to answer, and we can have all of you answer, anyone who wants to, is this question says, if you start college with a different path in mind, is it still okay to switch into healthcare? What does anyone think of that? Yeah.
Like I said, I started as an international relations major. I never would have thought that I would have switched. I would, like, freshman year, I'd been like, no, I'm not doing nursing. That's ridiculous. I'm not working in healthcare. I'm terrified of needles, for God's sakes. That's not something that I can do. And then I was, inspired and to switch. And it's absolutely possible. Even if you already are a senior in your bachelor's, if you want to get a master's in something else. Really funny thing to mention, when I was getting bored with international relations, I was looking for something else. I actually considered occupational therapy for a while. I was looking at the program at BU, and ultimately I decided I didn't want to have to get a master's or a doctorate right away, but occupational therapy and child life were kind of at the top of my list. Also, really quickly, I just wanted to touch on what you were saying, Beth. I think that what I like about our roles currently is that each of us are outside what you would think is traditional medicine, but we still are essential to the success of the patient. Like child life and occupational therapy and the community health worker, they're there to fill a very specific need outside of, here's your medicine, here's your surgery, okay, have a good day, bye. Without these roles of child life, OT, and community health worker, patients, we wouldn't see patients recover. Their health problems would be a lot more persistent. So even though they're less famous roles, I guess, they're still really, really essential. And personally, I really needed Melissa when I was a kid. When I was a kid, my worst fear was appendicitis, like to the point where if I get anxious to this day, I have right lower quadrant pain. And I'm like, do I have appendicitis? Is it starting? If I had known when I was a kid that if I ended up in the hospital, there'd be someone like Melissa there, I would have felt a lot better. So
yeah, I'm right with you on that. Like if I've only had surgery a few times in my life. My biggest fear is not the surgery, it's the IV that's going to hurt. So they'll take my blood pressure before the IV and it's through the roof. And they're like, oh, your blood pressure is really high. I'm like, just give me the IV and then take it again. I guarantee it will be better. And as soon as they do, it's fine. And then I go into surgery, which is actually the real scary part, without a care in the world. Totally irrational. It's crazy. Yeah. But it is what it is. But I agree with your statement on that. And as a healthcare worker in IT, I do nothing medical. That's one of the things that I think is so great about healthcare is that all of us, even in support services, like in IT or environmental services, or the folks that work in the kitchen, we all are part of that team. And it makes it so easy as a leader in healthcare to be able to motivate my staff, because we support you guys as the people who take care of the patients. So I don't take care of the patients, but I take care of the people who take care of the patients. And so I think that's one of the things in healthcare that's so great, is that we can all connect ourselves indirectly to that care of the patient and getting them healthy and getting them home, which is great, because none of it works without anyone, which is awesome. So does anyone else want to answer the question about if you start college with a different path in mind, is it okay to switch? Because I think some of you have done that. don't know if anyone has any other comments on that.
I kind of feel like in general, the more I don't think it matters what type of experience you have before entering whatever field. The experience in general is going to make you like you're going to be a better communicator. You're going to know like what it's like to be part of different types of teams. So I feel like in healthcare, you have to be so flexible and versatile anyways, that any experience you have is going to make you more prepared to be in the healthcare field. Definitely.
That's great. And I think what I've learned through all of these panels that we've been moderating is that there's a lot of people that have started a journey, their career journey down one path and made a change and ended up in healthcare, and all of the courses and their jobs and their experiences that they've had have helped sort of solidify where they are today. So there really is not a bad choice you can make. It just may be a more windy, less direct path to your final destination, but everything you learn along the way is very valuable to who you become as a professional, which is great. So Melissa, the next question is specifically about child life specialists. So this, the person asked, I'm interested in being a child life specialist, and something that I know that you deal with is bereavement and death, which is a role that I don't know how I can handle. So how do you cope with this, and how are you trained in school for these experiences?
So at Newton-Wellesley, we are very lucky that the patients that we work with are very acute. We don't see chronic. For the most part, we don't see chronic patients who are returning. We don't have any pediatric like oncology or hematology at Newton-Wellesley, but we do support families in the emergency room. And this like happens very rarely, but we do occasionally have deaths that occur. We also help support the children of adult patients. Like if a parent came in after.
I wasn't even thinking of that. Oh, wow.
We do a lot of memory making in those circumstances. The child life specialists that work in the emergency room will go and like do handprints or fingerprints to do like keepsakes, especially in a COVID time where obviously we want all families to be able to say goodbye to their loved ones, but if they are not able to, we will help provide those resources. We also have just tons of like different books and different handouts with different resources to help people get through that. Our social work department also has the HEAL program for patients who have experienced a loss of a baby or a stillbirth, and we'll help support families if they have siblings at home. Sometimes that's really hard for parents to share with older kids in the family that, if someone was however many months pregnant and something happened. So we do a lot of work with parents in that regard. I worked at the Brigham in radiation oncology before I came here to Newton-Wellesley. And though it was outpatient, we saw kids who were palliatively sick for years and years and years. And that is just so hard emotionally because you get to become close with these kids and these families, and just like the world seems so unjust in times. But it's just so important. And I think I don't care if you're a doctor or a nurse, everyone stresses self-care. And it's just so important to be able to have strong boundaries and to be able to separate yourself from the patients and the families that you're working with during those really intense times. I think it's really important to acknowledge those feelings. Like obviously, if you've been working with a patient and a family for years and someone passes, that's obviously devastating for everyone involved. To be able to acknowledge it, but it's also so important. Like you have to go and see other kids after you find out this news or after learn that this happens. So being able to take a minute and then kind of move on and like processing with your coworkers, I always thought was really helpful. And just like having something to look forward to at the end of the day, and like taking off your badge and like allowing yourself to separate from that scenario, because you have to. If you don't separate yourself, there's no way you can withstand working with those types of populations, because it can be so heavy on your heart. When I was at Wheelock, we took courses in bereavement and death and dying, but like more about the cultural ideas behind death and dying and what certain, rituals and routines. I feel like I learned a lot of the hands-on stuff that we do as child life specialists. I learned from other child life specialists, whether that be in internships or doing webinars and hearing from other specialists at other hospitals. But I do think like I know someone who works in the ICU, and that's all she does pretty much is like a big portion of it is like planning out, making the time that they have really special and making sure that the siblings and the parents and everyone are at peace with with however the situation goes, which like how like
As
that
much
job,
as you can be.
sure, and like that
Yeah.
job would not be for me. I know that about myself, but that's her passion. Like Shayna was saying earlier about finding your passion. Some people have that, like they want to help folks through those times. And I also always tried to remind myself in those moments too, just like how lucky, yeah, I mean, for lack of a better word, lucky I feel to have been part of those families, really tender, like life altering moments. Even if that was like playing with a sibling while their parents were in the ICU saying goodbye to their family member, like that 4-year-old might not remember their sibling passing, but they might remember that lady in the playroom. So it's taking like that perspective and just kind of humbling yourself in that way. But it is tough.
Yeah. So it sounds like from what you're saying that you got some training in school, but it's really learning from your colleagues that you work with and
definitely
being open to asking for help and asking for
Absolutely.
advice.
Yep, absolutely. And sometimes, you know, you just like if something like that happens at Newton-Wellesley, it's kind of like all hands on deck, whether not meaning like all 5 of us are like going into a patient room, obviously, but like, what can I get for you? Like, do you need these supplies from this closet? Okay. Do you need me to page spiritual care? Like making sure that child life specialist who's working can be presently involved, and all the other little things, we're always happy to help. But it is tough. It is.
Yeah. So I put that out there to the rest of the panel too. Have any of you had experiences with someone, any of your patients that have died that you've had to sort of help any other family members or anything through that? I don't know if that sort of directly impacts any of your roles.
I mean, as working in adult psychiatry, I have had a few patients who have been discharged who we've learned later have suicided. So that's pretty much like that sort of, I think some of the hardest processing that we do. And then it's really kind of like Melissa said, it's like all the departments were really to figure out how we can support each other. And we do like hold meetings where we kind of just talk about like, hey, how are we feeling? We try to just make sure that we're all being really present with each other and our feelings and supporting each other, and emphasizing self-care definitely is a big deal. So I think like from a death and dying perspective, that's kind of the closest I've gotten in my role. I think in terms of like supporting each other through difficult stuff, I think of COVID as like sort of like this huge thing that we all like had to figure out. And I think in many ways, as like healthcare professionals working with each other, I think we've really created systems that are a lot more intertwined and hopefully are a lot more supportive of each other in terms of self-care. I know like there have been a lot of changes in terms of like there's a peer supporter role that is a big deal within the hospital. So there's we have people who are trained to actually in those situations where there's really tough stuff going on, they're trained to help kind of process through that as a peer supporter. One of my colleagues is actually a peer supporter and had to go and be present for processing a suicide event. So those, I think that's the closest that I've really gotten.
Yeah, it's great to think that there's somebody whose sole focus there is watching the staff and being there to make sure they can see when someone's struggling and pull them aside and provide that help, because sometimes somebody doesn't know they're struggling until it's a long past. So excellent. That's great. I have another question. I just want to keep an eye on the time. We are already at 8:23, which I think it's gone by pretty fast. So the last question that's in here is, and I'll throw this out to any of the panelists, have you ever come across a situation in which you've had to help families overcome stigma about mental health? And then it says, if so, how? And especially families that may be from culturally or ethnic diverse backgrounds. So I don't know who wants to take that.
I can touch on this. I'm a person of color. I don't know, just gonna throw that out there. I was born in India. Both my parents are Indian, and mental health in an Indian culture is not something that's discussed. Even when I tell Indian people that I know that I work in mental health and psychiatry with populations that are people who have addictions or are homeless or things like that, I get a lot of like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, like, and I'm proud of what I do. They're like, really, you want to do that? And I'm like, and that goes kind of into the social determinants of health, like culture, the role that it plays, social class, and the role that that plays. And we could be here all night if you get me started on this, but I think that, that's one of my privileges. When I get a patient who is Indian, who is Muslim, who is Pakistani, who is from South Asia, and they see me, I can sometimes visibly see their relief. You know what I mean? Because sometimes, they're a first generation Indian kid who wouldn't be getting help at all if they were still in India. Sometimes they are an immigrant themselves and they see a person of color and they're just visibly like, okay, you know what I mean? Because there's someone there that gets why they won't call their family, why a family meeting is so stressful and detrimental for them, why, if your family is in India and it's COVID and you're in a psych hospital, like this, it's just a lot of really intricate things that go together. And your mom is calling from India at 2 a.m. and she's telling everyone in your family, and it's just going everywhere because the family is so interconnected. And then also, like, when I have PD patients, or when I'm talking to my own friends about it, like how their parents won't let them get therapists or won't let them go on medication even though they feel like they really need it, or they're trying to figure out how to like get a therapist or get help and hide it from the medical insurance. And I'm like, okay, like, and all of this stuff, that's a real problem within my own community, within when I see it when I'm working. And sometimes it impacts me too, like Melissa was saying, separating the personal from the professional. I have a hard time with that because I'm young and I don't have as much experience. And I remember very specifically at my old facility, I had a patient, a young woman. She was 22. She had an 18-month-old kid. She had immigrated to the United States 4 years ago after being married for 6 years to her husband. So if we do some math there, she was 16 or 17 when she got married in Pakistan. And she had basically gone into a mental health crisis and attempted suicide during COVID at the very beginning because she couldn't go back to India to see her family, and her husband she was very isolated and she didn't speak a lot of English. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, and this is a girl who, was educated in Pakistan, and she came here and she was unable to continue college. And I was like, I'm looking at her and I felt like I was looking at my mom, because my mom had me when she was 21. My mom came to America very quickly after that. She was also very isolated when she came here. And I'm looking at her and I'm like, if she's been in America for 4 years and she still doesn't speak any English, that tells me that she is very isolated in her community, very isolated in her home. And when she left, like, the husband basically forced her discharge. Like, there was very clearly either a neglect or some sort of domestic violence situation. And I watched them leave and I watched him like put her in the car. And I was so angry that day. I felt so helpless and I felt so frustrated with the system, and I was mad, and I was like, I can't believe this. Like, and I learned a lesson that day that there's only so much we can do. And that's when I would hope that someone like Steve or social worker or protective services would step in and take it the rest of the way. I could report it or connect them with the resources. I just didn't feel like I had that kind of support in the place where I was working at the time. I know at Newton-Wellesley, I'd be like, what's the extension? I'm calling them right now. Like, but that is where culture plays a role. And I, learned a lesson that I carry with me through nursing and through the rest of my career about the role that culture plays in the social determinants of health, in nursing, in mental health, all the way through. And
Yeah.
it's difficult. It's difficult to contend with for yourself and for your patients and for your friends and for your family. And it's just one of those things.
Yeah, that's great. Anyone else want to comment on that? I think you probably all have had some experience in this.
I think with the increase with the need for mental health care during COVID, I feel like for a lot of families who are like first time experience with like the inpatient bed search experience, I feel like being in the emergency room can be super eye-opening, because when you're boarding for an inpatient bed, typically you board in the ED. And in our emergency room, where we have the B side, which is like a securely locked area, I think it can be very eye-opening for parents to be passing out to go get a cup of coffee or to go to the bathroom, and you see 6, 7, 8 other adolescent young kids all in the same situation. And I think that can be super, it's like a big realization, like, wow, not only is my kid going through this, but there are 8 other kids just in this hospital alone. And through conversations with social work, that the parents have just about the bed search process, and coming to realize that sometimes kids wait weeks and weeks to get moved to a higher level of care. I think that's like a really big pill for folks to swallow who haven't had any experience. And I think, though that's daunting, it can also kind of be some source of comfort knowing that there are so many other families going through the same situation.
Yeah.
Mm.
Excellent.
Mm.
All right. Shayna and Steve, do either of you have any comments you want to add to that?
The one thing that I will add to everything that was said is that I feel like because of COVID, the need for more mental health resources was highlighted during this period of time. I think even people that never really thought about self-care and mental health and those different types of needs, they had this awakening where they realized like there's really a need for this thing and we need to do more about it. So I think that's
So
one
do you
good
think it's lifted some of the stigma?
for some people. I think some
For
people
some
are
people.
some people are taking the time to educate themselves. Even parents who were probably blind to their child's mental health circumstances probably saw that, all right, this is a real thing that needs to be talked about more and paid attention to.
And it's not, they're not the only ones, like Melissa was saying. There's I think people, it does seem through COVID that people are more open to talk about it, so that it does lift that stigma a bit, that it's not just me struggling with this. This is really kind of common, and there's power in that number and talking to other people about it. So
Exactly.
potentially one of the many silver linings that we can look at with COVID. There's a lot of very bad, but there have been some good things that have come out of the changes that we've seen. So we are at 8:30, which is our scheduled time to end. So I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts that they want to share with the group before we wrap up.
The final thing that I would say is when you're choosing a career, you'll never, most likely than not, it will not be the perfect choice or what you want the first time
What
around.
you planned.
Yeah, exactly. Even with your choice in college. So don't worry about disappointing family members or other people. The worst thing that you can do is disappoint yourself by choosing to do something that you're not really passionate about.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of going off that, I would just say to take your time and like allow yourself the grace to figure it out. It's such a, like, there's so much pressure on high school and college kids to have it all figured out and to know exactly what you want to do, because it costs so much money and it is such a big commitment, but just to allow yourself that grace.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, I would definitely say that, it's everybody's path is different. I mean, I took many, many years off before I went back to school, and I went back to school and my master's. So that's not where I started. I actually had my GED from high school, which is something I don't share with like everybody in the whole world, but it's a thing that's true. And so I kind of think of that when Melissa said, kind of give yourself grace. I think really allow that, like, yeah, it might not work out exactly the way you want it to the first time. And I think try to remember that all of your experiences you can pull something from, right? So like, what did you learn? What did you pull? What can you gain? And all of it sort of creates who you are. And at some point you can bring that to your career. I get to run, if I wanted to, run a group on gardening, because that's my chance. And I get to,
I need to go to that group because I kill every plant. So
yeah, I get to talk about like when things smell good, it makes you feel happy. Like and that's not where I started, but it's where I am. And it's, I think you have to allow that it's a process. And, there aren't really wrong turns.
I would say don't get discouraged. A lot of times with a lot of colleges, there's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of BS and a lot of hoops that they make you jump through. And the thing I tell myself is way stupider the people than me have become nurses. And if they can do it, I can too. And take every learning opportunity that you get, because I can tell you, I learn so much from the nurses that I work with and from Melissa and from Shayna and everyone on your team. I was really struggling with my medication competency. I had to like spike an IV bag and I couldn't get it. And one of the nurses, she pulled me aside and she's like, here's some tubing, here's some dextrose I stole from the med surg unit. Now you're going to do it with me. And I'm like, thank you. And they teach me so much every day. Like if I'm struggling with I had an exam on I was working Sunday night and an exam Monday morning on nephrology and the respiratory system. And I was like, what is the difference between a nephrotoxic and a this syndrome? And I'm just venting about it. And the nurse who wasn't even in the conversation, she was just listening. She hands me a handout. She printed it out for me. And she's like, here you go. I found one for you. And it's so much support all the way through my entire experience here. And you just learn a lot. And take your time and be kind to yourself. We throw self-care around a lot. We don't always practice it ourselves as healthcare workers. There's a high level of burnout in this field, a high level of fatigue, and we really have to change that. And that starts with like respecting ourselves and respecting our values.
And giving yourself the time. Yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that it's okay not to know what you want to do when you grow up. I still joke, as a 50-year-old woman, I still don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. I also have a bachelor's degree in psychology, which I do feel comes in handy in my leadership role at the hospital. Never did I dream I was going to be the chief information officer at a community hospital in Massachusetts. That's just sort of where my path went as I got my first job and found something that I was passionate about and loved and was good at. So it's, I think, just an important lesson for everyone to know is it's okay to not know what you want to do. Some people, I'm so impressed with those, someone who from the time they were young said, I'm going to be a doctor, and they became a doctor. Amazing. I never had that. And I think there's a lot of people that don't, and they sometimes feel like they're all by themselves. So thank you so much to all of our panelists for tonight. This was an amazing session. We really appreciate your time and the valuable information you provided and being so candid and sharing your experiences and what your life is like in your roles today. So on behalf of the Workforce Development Council and Newton-Wellesley Hospital, I want to thank everyone who participated and all of our attendees. We hope you found it as informative as you think about future career journey for yourself. We do invite everyone to join us for our next two sessions that we will have. The next one is December 15th, which we will cover careers that require 2 years or less of additional schooling. So you won't need a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or a doctorate degree or anything. We'll have patient care assistant, medical assistant, respiratory therapy, medical assistant in the lab, and some of our support services, like I was talking about, really important roles at the hospital. And then our last session will be in January, on January 19th, and that will be our technology session, where we'll have radiology tech, central sterile supply tech, med tech in the lab, pharmacy tech, surgical tech. So we encourage everyone to join us to learn more about it. And I just want to thank everyone who attended. We will be sending an email to all of the registered attendees with the link to the video for tonight. So I hope everyone has a great rest of their night. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Bye.